Is Tank Dell one of the most underrated receivers in the 2023 NFL Draft? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Magdziuk. Follow her on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. Kate, we are talking about one of the most fun players in the NFL draft today. It's Nathaniel Tank Dell from Houston. Give me your thoughts on the player.
Oh man, Marcus, he's a tiny one. Let's get this out of the way.
He's small.
Let's talk about the very teeny tiny elephant in the room because he's 5'8" and 3/8 inches, 163 pounds. Let's be clear, that is enormously small for a wide receiver in the
I'm
NFL.
worried that a strong breeze could blow him away.
It might, or it might end up reeling in a touchdown somehow because Tank Dell, despite his size, he has been one of the most productive wide receivers in all of college football over the last 2 seasons. He's the only player in the FBS with more than 2,400 receiving yards over the last 2 seasons. Only player with more than 27 receiving touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. But he's tiny. Like that's the eval. He's so productive. He has been my favorite route runner.
Really quickly, yes. What concerns you more? Is it the height or the weight?
Honestly, based on his game, Marcus, like that's sort of the thing. I'm in a really weird spot with Tank Dell. Like as a player watching his tape, you would never, ever, ever guess that he is that size. I'm probably a little bit.
He plays so much bigger than that, right?
Yeah, like watching the tape, like there are some players that you can watch and you're like, yes, he looks tiny on the field. Tank Dell doesn't look tiny, and there's not really a ton of elements to his game. I think probably the most concerning point would be, height and how it would match up against opposing corners. But here's the thing, we don't have a winning recipe in any direction here, but here's the thing that keeps me going back to Tank Dell over and over again. We mentioned the productivity and the size, obviously, but there has not been a single route runner in this class that I've enjoyed watching more than Tank Dell. And he's not got blazing speed. He's not going to run a 4.2 40, but he wins because of his ability to create separation, even in really short yardage situations like the end zone. He can be face to face with an opposing corner in press coverage, and between his footwork, his manipulation of the opposing defender, he can get clear wide open in a fraction of a second. And so, if that ability translates to the NFL, height and weight don't necessarily matter all that much because this skill set is, I think, what he's so good at compensates and complements the lack of size so well because size isn't going to matter if you're not making, contested catches.
I will say, the reason I asked you about what matters more, the height or the weight, is we've actually seen some players under 170 pounds be really good in the NFL. Like Devontae Smith weighed in at 170 at his pro day. Now he's taller, right? But he's thin as can be, right? We saw Hollywood Brown come in at 166. We saw Deshaun Jackson come in at 169. Even someone like Tutu Atwell was 155. I mean, it's hard to believe he's a lot bigger than Tutu Atwell. For me, the concern is the height, right? 5'08" You look at the history of the NFL and receivers that are 5'8" and shorter. There's just not a lot of those guys. Like you basically need to be 5'9" or taller to be somewhat relevant. And obviously being short and light is not fantastic. Okay, but you mentioned like he's an awesome football player. He's an awesome football player.
He's
According to
he's
according
so
to P,
good.
yeah, PFF stats for you. Over the last 2 years, right? 96 percentile in separation percentage, 96 percentile in separation percentage versus single coverage, 96 percentile in receiving grade, 98th percentile in receiving grade in single coverage. And that matches what we saw at the Senior Bowl, like going up against some awesome cornerbacks. They couldn't cover him, right? So I think he's going to need the right team, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But in terms of just a player, he's fantastic.
In terms of just the player, like if you had shown me the tape, shown me the stats, shown me everything except his height and weight, I'd be absolutely over the moon in love with this wide receiver. And interestingly, he had no problem scoring touchdowns at Houston. Um, I mentioned, the contested catch. He didn't even have a ton of contested catches because he gets open.
And he's not going to in the NFL. Like his game is going to be all based on I'm going to be 5 yards further away than you are, right?
Yes, like that's going to be the thing that makes or breaks him. But like interestingly, the ability that he has to get open, like that will translate to the end zone. Like that could actually translate to
Sure.
fantasy production based on what we saw from him at the collegiate level. Because maybe he's not going to be a alpha wide receiver one
No,
posting
no.
1,400 yards, but could I picture him as like a really productive slot wide receiver who's scoring more touchdowns than most other slot wide receivers? Kinda, if we're in the right situation.
So, I mean, obviously the comp that everybody gives these shorter receivers. Oh, you're Deshaun Jackson, or oh, you're Hollywood Brown, or if we think you're a gadget, you're Tavon Austin, right? Why couldn't why couldn't he be similar to what Darnell Mooney is for the Bears, right? Because Mooney is a 170-pound speed receiver who is very slight. He doesn't win in contested catches, but has been a really good player in the NFL. Why couldn't why couldn't Dell be a version of Darnell Mooney?
Yeah, I think like the thing that the comparison I wrote down was like a smaller Hunter Renfro, which is
Okay.
crazy because Hunter Renfro is already uh pretty small in his own right, but not quite as small as Tank Dell. But like I love to see uh Hunter Renfro in the end zone. I love to see what he comes up with in terms of his route running to create separation. And that's what I really like about Tank Dell. So like imagine um the creativity and the way that Hunter Renfro can manipulate opposing defenders. Like I think, you know, Tank Dell has a lot of that to his game. And we saw Hunter Renfro be
Yeah.
incredibly productive. Again, smaller, so the comp can't stick, but he's just such a different player than I feel like I've seen before. And this is a relatively small receiving class. He's one of the smaller ones, but again, even at the collegiate level, back-to-back seasons, incredibly productive.
I mean, we're saying all this. We love the game. We love the tape. We recognize that he's small, and we recognize that you're not going to have to spend, a first round dynasty pick on him. We're talking about, a
This is
later
a
round
value pick.
pick. It's a value pick, but he is somebody where if he gets in the right offense, maybe he does become a pretty big fantasy producer. Which offense is that? More on that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on anything and everything from money lines to point spreads to number of three-pointers drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to fanduel.com/lockedon. That is fanduel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Kate, let's talk about some potential landing spots. And before we do that, I should mention that most draft sites value him somewhere between the second and fourth round. We have seen somebody like Tutu Atwell, who we've mentioned on this podcast. He went in the second round. Rondale Moore went in the second round. But then we saw somebody like Calvin Austin last year, another small receiver, go in the fourth round. So anywhere in that range. But what are some offenses that you think could maximize his skill set?
I'd kind of like it, and tell me what you think of this. If I'm totally deranged, feel free to yell at me. But what about the Atlanta Falcons, who, they have Kyle Pitts, who can play tight end. He can play out wide. You've got a very dominant alpha wide receiver, like prototypical alpha in Drake London. Olamide Zaccheaus, who's been their primary slot wide receiver, hitting free agency this year. I think that this would be a really interesting situation. They've got stability within the run game. Depending on the direction that this passing attack goes, I think he could be a really great complement to what they need and the other players that are on the field in terms of adding those receiving weapons. I think he'd kind of round out that group really nicely.
They also need just a lot more speed and quickness in the wide receiver court, right? Like, we love Drake London. Like, we're both big fans of Drake London. His game is not based on speed and quickness. Kyle Pitts is a freak athlete at the position, but he's really because he's a 6'6" tight end that can run, in the 4.4s. What they need is the guy that's the jitterbug, that can do the end arounds, that can do the slant routes and take him 50 yards. Like, I agree that's a good fit. I'm going to give you the three teams that he's been most drafted by in the PFF mock draft simulator, and I want your thoughts. Number 1, the Chicago Bears.
I like every single wide receiver, Marcus, is being drafted to the Chicago Bears. But I don't see how this is how does this pick fit with the Chicago Bears and what they need?
They've already got Mooney, who we talked about.
They've already got Darnell Mooney, and they need an alpha dog. They don't need little Mr. Jitterbug.
Let's be honest.
Knock.
They kind of already have a gadget player in Chase Claypool who they're not using enough as is.
Yeah. I think that I wouldn't send him there if you paid me.
Okay.
No.
Next one. This one's very interesting. What about the Packers?
Interesting.
Randall Cobb is a free agent.
Yeah.
Al Lazard's a free agent.
I think it could be a very good fit, honestly. It's weird because I feel like they still don't really have all of those pieces. TBD on what Christian Watson's true ceiling and floor look like. We saw the touchdown production. We know he's a killer athlete. Mm-hmm. Can he put all those skills together and round out his game a bit? Like, what is Romeo Doubs' ceiling? There's a lot of questions in that receiving core that, again, I prefer to send this guy to a team that he's the missing piece. He's the last piece of the puzzle, as opposed to an offense where, there are still a lot of questions. I don't hate it. I don't love it. How about the Chargers? We talked about, their potential upcoming need at, for a slot wide receiver. You have Mike Williams on the outside. Maybe they answer some questions at the tight end position, in free agency. Who knows? This is also a pretty talented tight end class. I kind of like the Chargers for him.
I mean, this goes back to the theme of the offseason for this podcast, is that we want every single receiver to go to the Chargers and play with Justin Herbert. So yes, there's not a receiver in this class I would be like, you know what, doesn't fit with the Chargers. So,
well, I think it could be a very interesting situation. Like, if Tank Dell and Justin Herbert were to establish some chemistry, like I could very easily picture it. I think Tank Dell, he's going to be a wide receiver that if you can get on the same page as your quarterback, and only Tank Dell knows the route that he's running and he can create separation, and your quarterback has the talent to anticipate that separation, home free, baby. Like that could be a really, really interesting fit. And they are losing DeAndre Carter in free agency. Jalen Guyton's a restricted free agent. Just some potential there, I think.
I'm gonna run through like 3 or 4 other teams. You just give me like 1 or 2 words really quickly what you think. Miami.
Nah.
Too much speed. There's such a thing as too much speed.
Too much.
Cleveland Browns.
Sure. I still like David Bell. I'm still willing to hold on to that, but yeah, sure.
Baltimore Ravens.
Yes, but I think they have more. Again, I still think they need to find a true wide receiver one. Like I don't think Tank Dell is going to be the answer to their needs.
Eagles.
Love.
Yeah, I could see him being in the slot and the Eagles using him in a lot of different ways. Dallas Cowboys.
I'm going to say no, just because CeeDee Lamb's so successful out of the slot.
Yep, I agree.
And I think that's where Tank Dell's going to need to live.
Yeah, again, this fit is going to be so important with him, probably more so than any other receiver in this class, just because if he goes to the wrong team, he's going to be completely irrelevant. He could go to getting 1 or 2 touches a game, and we really don't see him, and people just kind of mislabeling him as a gadget. But if he goes to the right offense and he's the full-time slot receiver and he's running 32 routes a game, maybe he is somebody that could get you 6 for 65 in any single week. So again, fit important. Also, his combine performance important. We should mention that's going to be happening this weekend. Tank Dell puts on a show at the combine. Maybe he does become, a second round pick. And I think that does change the equation a little bit. Okay, let's talk about his current dynasty value and kind of how we value him going forward. All that next. All right, Kate, we are talking about Tank Dell from Houston. Currently on Dynasty League Football, he's being ranked as wide receiver 19.
Why?
Wide receiver 19. What are your thoughts?
Too low. And I get it. And this is a very weird feeling for me, Marcus, because I'm not used to being the little wide receiver advocate. It's just not my deal. This is probably the most I've ever liked an undersized wide receiver. I don't know what it is about Tank Dell, but it feels too low given I think the skill set and given the production we saw at the collegiate level, and again, given the fact that his production wasn't based on winning in a physical way. Like,
yep.
That's what I like about his production. If he was, wrestling balls out of the hands of opposing cornerbacks, if he was, really getting that money based on physicality in college, that's a no-brainer for me. Like that's not going to translate. The fact that where he won was his ability to separate and just be open. I love to watch him on scramble drills. Like he's a dog. Like he's a dog, and he's a little dog, but hey, sometimes there's room for the dog you carry around in your purse. I don't know.
I just want to remind people that at this time last year, Wan'Dale Robinson's startup ADP was 168. Okay. And after the combine and after the draft, it rose up to 126. Now it's at 97 overall. Wan'Dale Robinson is exactly the same size, basically. He's a little tiny bit heavier. Tank Dell was far more productive in college, right? We saw the same thing happen a couple of years ago with Rondale Moore. Once Rondale Moore went through the pre-draft process and became a second-round pick, we saw his value shoot up. Not saying that you should be spending a first round pick or even a second round pick on him right now. But having him as wide receiver 19 is too low because we know he's not going to be the 19th receiver drafted. He's far more likely to be the 9th receiver drafted. And if that's the case, you can get a lot of value on him right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really a nice way of putting it, Marcus. I just think the upside's much more significant. And if you told me right now, like if we were evaluating Rondale Moore coming out of school next to Wan'Dale Robinson, next to Tank Dell, I'd be taking Tank Dell.
Yep.
And
I don't know. And listen, that comes from one of the biggest Wan'Dale Robinson fans in the world, but I agree with you.
like there's plenty of elements to clean up for his game. Like he wasn't perfect despite all of that production, like needs to work on ball security, had some drops, had a couple fumbles, but I just think that what he does, like I encourage everybody listening, watching to go watch just Tank Dell's clips from the Senior Bowl. I loved his one-on-one matchups with opposing cornerbacks because they knew, like, that's one of these situations where you have a cornerback. They know their primary job is to cover this wide receiver. This wide receiver knows that their one goal is to win over this cornerback, and cornerbacks couldn't do it. Like,
Yep.
They couldn't do it. And that was in a situation where I don't it man, I like him too much.
I will
Help
also
me.
say,
Send help.
you're starting to see a lot of the what I call big draft media people moving him up their big boards. For example, we saw Mel Kiper put him inside his top 10 receivers. PFF has him at 37 overall, ahead of guys like Josh Downs, Kayshon Boutte, Jalen Hyatt. You're seeing a lot of people moving them up the board, which means he could be a major, major value in your startup drafts right now, your dynasty rookie drafts, if you're happy to doing those right now, especially if he gets that second round draft capital. So keep an eye on our guy, Nathaniel Tank Dell, because he is one heck of a football player.
I can't wait. This is going to be a big weekend for him.
Yes.
I think
Big weekend for him.
there's a lot of upside here though, Marcus. So
Yeah.
if you're in one of these absolutely deranged dynasty leagues where you are drafting your rookies this early, I think this is a guy that needs to be on your rosters. You could probably grab him in the
100%
third
agree.
round, and there's going to be a lot of upside.
Absolutely. You might even be able to get him later than the third round based on where he's currently going. You might be able to get
Not
him in
if
the
you're
fourth
drafting
round.
with me, baby.
No, heck no, neither one of us. We're gobbling him up in the third round all day long. All right, that is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. You can check out the show on YouTube, Locked On Dynasty over there. I am at Marcus_Mosher. Matt and Ryan will be back on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Kate, you and I back on Friday to talk about a certain Oklahoma receiver that we like quite a bit. Excited to talk to you guys then.